Thank you for joining the new pathway of Komeko, Japanese rice flour presented by J Fudo. A workshop to introduce you to the blooming potential of Japanese rice flour. I'm your host, Kana. This workshop is organized by J Fudo, which is an international branding organization for Japanese agriculture, forestry, and fishery products, including sake, tea, wagyu, and many more. We would like to appeal the quality of rice flour from Japan that you have never come across from here, land of rice. 6 rice flour corporations are cooperating with us in this workshop. Please let us know if you would like a sample. We will ship them to you after the workshop. If you have any questions, please post them on the chat. In the second half of the workshop, we will have time to discuss the impressions of using Japanese rice flour and some ideas for recipes. We are looking forward to your inspiring feedback. Now, today's workshop will be brought to you by Waldo Yan and Jay Fudo. I'm sure Waldo will have some interesting thoughts to share with you. And I'm sure you all know Waldo is one of those intriguing non-conventional chefs who has appeared at Smorgasburg, Los Angeles, many pop-up events, and collaborated with many, many restaurants. We have asked him to join us as a person who is sincerely committed to food and whose vision is to open up a new perspective on food culture. Waldo, it's a pleasure to be with you today, Waldo. Hello. Okay. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you. And I might not be, yes, oh, okay. You were slightly muted. Okay. But you can hear me, right, Waldo?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Your microphone might be muted. Maybe. So, well, no, we'll sort that out. And while that, we're looking at, okay, working now. So, hi, Waldo.
Hi.
Hello. So, thank you for joining us today. And first of all, we would like to, ask you why you're in this industry. I mean, you're from like a whole different place from there to culinary world of culinary, right?
Right. When my parents first moved to the country, they of course had dreams that I would go through the American education system, get a nice degree, and then become either a lawyer or a doctor. Unfortunately, I didn't do that. I kept my end of the deal. I went through school. I did okay in it. But the whole time I knew I really loved food and I knew I wanted to pursue it. At an early age, food was really important in our household. My parents worked at a small family restaurant, and even though they were busy 6.5 days out of the week, my mom would make sure to cook a home-cooked meal for us completely from scratch every single week. So needless to say, I learned to fall in love with food at a really young age. And now that I'm a little older, I hope to make other people happy with food one day.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, good. So thank you, Waldo. I mean, the background is just fabulous. And this time you were able to meet this new ingredients, Japanese rice flour. What was your impression?
So immediate impressions, I was so fascinated by the fact that an ingredient as simple and staple as rice flour could have varying degrees of quality. At least here in Los Angeles, we primarily have access to the same 2-3 brands of rice flour that are produced in Southeast Asia, to my knowledge. But getting my hands on Japanese rice flour provided me an experience that was completely new to me. ingredient that I've never had a chance to work with in this regards, and it was a huge learning experience, really.
Yeah, that's what I heard you when we last time we spoke. Um, what was your first impression when you got the bag of rice flour, Japanese rice flour?
So right away, there were qualities about this Japanese rice flour that were noticeable to me. Um, if I were to try to summarize my findings, it were that the rice flour was extremely delicate in texture. The flavor was beautifully neutral with just a subtle sweetness in the background. And then lastly, it was also so apparent that every single step of the process leading to producing this rice flour was so thoughtfully curated. To my knowledge and from what I've gathered, the rice is a specific variety. It's grown specifically for the purpose of becoming rice flour. And the companies responsible for producing this even went as far as to innovate the milling technology that goes into it. So at the end, I was provided with a extremely consistent product that was made to extremely tight specifications.
Um, what do you think? I mean, rice flour is still, well, not the biggest, doesn't gain like a biggest popularity there yet, I assume. What do you think of the possibility of the Japanese rice flour in the future in that market where you at?
So I'd like to believe that in Los Angeles, there are endless amounts of food interested people. There are people who want to work with it professionally, so cooks, chefs, bakers. There are people who are avid at home enthusiasts, so who want to get their hands dirty and want to actually experience product that is produced at a tighter level of quality control. And then there are obviously people who just like going out and enjoy eating. And these same people can still benefit from access to a ingredient that we normally have very, very limited options for. Again, going back to what I was saying before, growing up 20 something years here in Los Angeles, I've only seen the same 2, 3 brands at all the grocery stores. But I don't think that indicates that there's a lack of interest in this ingredient that's so staple in the Asian and Asian American pantry. I think that we were just waiting for there to be availability for a different product, and that there are lots of people who are excited to try it. I know I
Thank,
was.
okay, thank you so much. This time you came up with this, certain recipe that really enhances and articulates the characteristic of Japanese rice flour. Before you tell us what came up with, what was your thought to make this recipe this time, from deriving from the characteristic that you got, the bag from you got?
Okay. So driving principles. I think that rice flour has sometimes been relegated to a role in Western baking, where it's utilized as a gluten-free substitute, but sort of misused. So when rice flour is used as a direct one-to-one substitute for wheat flour, I think we're missing the chance to highlight its good characteristics, and often we're exaggerating where its shortcomings are. For example, rice flour is never going to perform the exact same way as wheat flour, which is milled a little coarser, has a protein structure that's inherently different with the presence of gluten. So it's never going to make that really beautiful, rustic sourdough loaf. But like I was saying before, rice flour is delicate in both flavor and texture. So let's talk texture first. It produces a crumb that is very, very evenly dispersed, a lot of micro bubbles, And beyond that, the end product tends to be fluffier in nature. And then when it comes to flavor, so many times when we're talking wheat flour, there's this blooming interest in investigating ancient grains that have a little bit more character, offer a little bit more flavor and substance to the end baked product. But there's an understated application to having a starch like rice flour that is a very neutral canvas. It doesn't have a strong flavor of its own, except for a subtle sweetness. But this allows us to accentuate more delicate flavors in our finished baked products. For example, instead of needing to apply massive amounts of matcha in order to compete against the flavor of wheat flour, we're able to capture a potent flavor of matcha using less of it, and more of the characteristics of the matcha are able to be expressed. We don't just get a characteristic, slightly bitter tea flavor. We're able to pick up on some of the savoriness and even some of the back end sweetness that's characteristic of really high grade matcha. So really what was our driving principle was that we don't want to find uses for rice flour that kind of sort of substitute the uses that we can use in wheat flour. We wanted to find situations where rice flour excelled naturally, highlight its best qualities, and demonstrate the diversity that it really offers in our kitchen.
On behalf of Japanese rice flour, if Japanese rice flour have a character or a personality, I would just love to say thank you so much, because those are the stuff we knew in Japan, and it was just difficult to convey as a message. And you got that from all, experimenting from on your own, and that was just a bless to us. Thank you so much. So my question is, are you going to use matcha today?
Yes, our recipe does feature matcha today.
Okay, I'll give the time. I'm turning the time to you, so it's all yours.
All right. So the recipe that we're making today is matcha angel food cake. Angel food cake, traditionally fat-free cake, very fluffy, very airy, still traditionally made with cake flour milled from wheat. But today, we're going to use a blend of starches, all gluten-free, featuring, of course, rice flour. So let's get into it. If we were to kind of consider what steps are broadly involved in making this cake, first step is blending dry ingredients. So right here, we have some tapioca starch. We have rice flour. We have cornstarch, coconut flour, a little bit of baking powder. As much as possible, try to source aluminum-free baking powder, and then a little bit of ground matcha as well. So what we are going to do is take these ingredients and sift them once so that we make sure that anything that may have picked up a little bit of atmospheric moisture isn't too clumpy. That also really helps us disperse these ingredients evenly. And we'll give them a quick, gentle little whisk just to make sure that we're mostly homogeneous. Now from here, we can set these things aside and we can focus on the second big step in making angel food cake, which is making a meringue. Now, meringue is usually, in its most basic form, a combination of egg white and sugar. And it's whipped and whipped and whipped until the sugar dissolves and we're able to capture air inside the protein of the egg white. We already have a pre-made meringue here in the interest of time. But when it comes to making meringue, maybe 2-3 big rules we want to keep in mind. Make sure no fat comes in contact with your egg white. So big culprit usually is a little bit of egg yolk falling into it. If you ever see that, make sure you fish it out because that's going to make your meringue fail to fluff up. And then sometimes there's a little bit of residual grease in any of the bowls and utensils involved. You want to make sure that there's no grease at all because it'll cause the meringue to fail to rise to its optimal levels of fluffiness. Now, stand mixer is going to be your best friend here. You can totally make it by hand, but it requires a person of more constitution than myself. So I'm going to use a machine to make sure that I don't get tired. The last step or rule to keep in mind when making meringue is you actually want to add your ingredients in stages and make sure that you're increasing the speed in stages as well. If you dump everything in here all at once, everything being egg white, sugar, a little bit of vanilla extract, a little bit of lemon juice, because the acid helps fortify the structure of the proteins for a more stable meringue, and a little bit of salt to offset the sugar in this as well. If you put all these ingredients in at once and just crank the mixer to maximum, this will whip, but the end meringue tends to collapse a little bit more quickly, and you'll actually never achieve the same level of volume as well. So big rules to keep in mind when we're making meringue. Keep fat away from everything. Make sure that we are turning up the speed in stages to achieve the most stable end result. Now, the actual result that we're looking for is actually short of what's called soft peaks. So when you have soft peaks, you should be able to lift the whisk out of the bowl and the meringue will sort of droop downwards. You see, in our case, it doesn't form peaks at all, falls right back into the meringue bowl, but it does pile up on top of itself. Yeah? So these are sort of the visual cues that we're looking for when we're identifying very, very soft peaks. Now, from this stage, what we are going to do in the next step is combine dry ingredients with meringue. So we get our dry ingredients, pass them over a sieve one more time, and just gently sift them over the meringue. Looking for a nice little even layer. Let's get the rest of this out. Okay. And from here, now that all the dry ingredients and wet ingredients are together, let's talk folding technique. So we worked really, really hard to whip as much air as structurally possible into this meringue. Last thing we want to do is really press down on it with a lot of force. We're looking to fold, and the technique behind that really involves scooping down, picking it up, and then folding it over like this. So again, scooping and folding. We're not pressing, we're not crushing, we're not stabbing. This is a gentle procedure. And you know when this is mixed, when you don't see any dry pockets anymore. That's very important for the structure of the cake. And since we're using matcha, there's an easy color identifier. When you aren't seeing green and white streaks, and everything is a homogeneous pale green, you know that you've already mixed everything all together as well. So again, go nice and slow. We're not looking to press down on anything. We're not crushing the air out of this. We're just scooping and folding, looking for those dry pockets, and getting everything mixed together. Let's take just a little bit longer. See, and this is why we use a stand mixer. Save our energy for the easy stuff. All right, we are almost there. As you get close to the final stages of mixing the two, it's okay to kind of poke around gently with your spatula, just to make sure that if there are any dry pockets, you can find them and get them mixed in. Interesting note, actually, while we're doing this. Typically, we don't recommend using super high-grade matcha in most baked products, at least in my experience. Prolonged exposure to heat in the oven destroys a lot of the subtle aroma and the flavor qualities that you're really paying for with really nice matcha. But in my experience, since this cake is so airy, when it bakes, the structure of the cake is almost a little bit more insulated, and it's not exposed to the direct heat of the oven in as impactful a way. And even nicer matcha carries a lot of its subtleties in this cake. And again, that fact in combination with the fact that the starches we're using, like the rice flour, carry less inherent flavor themselves, we really get a potent taste and the full impact of the matcha flavoring without having to use too much of it. All right, so now we are thoroughly mixed. We are going to load this into a tube pan as our next step. So let's talk tube pans really quickly. So this is a tube pan right here, has a tube in the middle. The material makeup of this makes a really big difference for the success of our recipe. Big rule, stay away from nonstick. As much as you can, try to opt for an aluminum pan. Stainless steel will do okay in a pinch too. The reason behind this, and I'll just be gently loading batter into this as I explain, is that angel food cake actually needs to stick to the walls of the pan, or else when it's done baking, it'll collapse in on itself. So it's actually very important that we aren't using a non-stick pan, because while in theory, that sounds like it's going to work to our advantage, it actually works against us. Now, if you see, I actually went back and gave this a little bit of an additional mixing. Sometimes you'll find that there are little itty bitty dry pockets that escape you. No worries, before it goes into the pan, just give it a gentle fold and mix. Same technique we were applying before, and things should bake up just fine. All right. So again, aluminum pan, not nonstick. We don't put any butter, any nonstick spray in this, because we want to encourage the angel food cake to stick to the walls of the pan while it's baking, so it can climb up nice and tall, and when it's cooling, it won't collapse in on itself. All right. So after we get the batter into the pan, just take that same spatula, level out the top ever so gently. Same thing, we're not pressing down really hard. We just want to make sure there's a level cooking surface that we're working with. Give things a quick little wipe. And then we pop it in the oven. 350 degrees, 45 minutes. And the cake will be ready to pull out. When we do pull out the cake, it is very important that we work quickly to pull out the pan, invert it upside down to allow it to cool. The reason behind this, again, angel food cake has so little structure and is so airy that by inverting it, we're actually using gravity to our advantage. Instead of the cake now collapsing in on itself, it's cooling and staying as tall as possible because the top is now stuck to the pan and the bottom that's exposed and being pulled down by gravity gets nice and tall. And at the end of that extended cooling process, you want to give it at least 2 hours. Make sure that it's not warm at all. You're just going to take a little offset spatula or any little knife that you have, run around the edge of the pan, run around the inner tube of the pan, invert it, and then your cake will release itself nice and easy. In the interest of time though, we don't want to keep anyone waiting, so we actually have a cake ready to go. So right here, we have a finished angel food cake. We're going to cut into this so that we can get a more clear shot of its interior crumb structure. And you can go ahead and give this a try too. All right. So we have our cake, and then we also made a little side sauce to accompany it. This is a mango, yogurt, and sake sauce. Now, the guiding light behind why we developed this recipe was angel food cake, clearly very light, both in texture and flavor. Desserts, everyone loves something creamy and satisfying, but sometimes we don't want to walk away feeling too heavy from the experience. So the combined fruit fiber and pectin and the yogurt gives us the mouthfeel of something very creamy and luxurious, but we're still able to avoid loading too much fat into the sauce. That allows flavors to be expressed in a much brighter fashion, which is also why we opted for uncooked mango instead of cooking it down into like a really jammy flavor. Jams have their time and place, but since we're talking about light, delicate angel food cake, we really wanted a sauce pairing that was an extension of that philosophy. And the sake plays a role in this, obviously, because sake is also made from rice. And why not get more rice into this when we can? But also, a little bit of alcohol, in my experience, also helps to lift and make more apparent the flavors of very, very ripe tropical fruit. If you've ever smelled a mango, a papaya, pineapple, bananas, when they're really, really ripe, they give off esters that resemble the smell of alcohol. And I think pairing a little bit of sake with the mango accentuates that effect. So we get bright, but thoroughly ripened flavors. And this is our cake. Cut nice and big because it's mostly air, right? And it's fat-free, so it's basically health food.
Well, go ahead and let's give it a try. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Some people like using knife and fork. It's way more fun eating with our hands.
And much delicious, though. Waldo, since we can't have that with you, a quick question. Is it like
Mhm.
how's the texture when you bite into it?
Great question. And I'm so sorry I can't be feeding all of you. Like it hurts my soul that you guys would give me time of day and I can't even share cake. But let's talk texture. Visually, we can already see lots of little bubbles inside this cake. Very, very fluffy. And then as I squeeze it, notice that it sort of bounces back.
Bounces back, yes.
So the reason why we use the combination of starches, like tapioca starch, in addition to rice flour, was just like in life, everyone on a team is going to have something they're really, really good at, something they're not so good at. And when we combine starches, we can manipulate texture in really interesting ways. So this isn't just light and airy.
Avengers? Are we talking Avengers?
Yeah, cake version.
Whatever.
So, we're not just looking at soft, one-dimensional texture. This cake is soft, fluffy, has a little bit of chew, a little bit of bounce, and as you can see as I'm ripping this apart, a little bit of stretch as well.
Yes.
Like just enough to barely remind us of mochi texture.
You're right.
Yeah.
As you were mentioning during the cooking, I thought it could be like more fluffy, like an air, but it has like a certain degree of density, and even has the bouncing back. I mean, that's amazing.
Right, and this is all linked back to what we were saying originally about having access to ingredients that are thoughtfully produced, make it really, really easy for us to engineer texture because we know that that product is reliably going to generate X result. The rice flour in this case, we knew would always be milled finely. We knew that it would absorb rapidly into the meringue. So we wouldn't have to worry about mixing it so much that it would deflate. At the end of the day, it's like you're saying, this cake is anything but one-dimensional. It captures everything we want in a light but satisfying dessert. And it's gluten-free. It's not like we're making sacrifices so that we can avoid gluten. We utilized the starches in play to their best characteristics, and it just so happens to be gluten-free, not the other way around.
Right. I'm sure there are so many questions from the audience too. I mean, I have tons of questions. If you wish to have a chat with Waldo, please raise your hand and please take part into this, conversation. And any question is it's fine from you, like regarding rice flours from Japan. Okay, I see a hand, raising hand. Oh, Brian. Okay, Brian, hello.
Hi.
Go ahead and talk with Waldo.
Hi, Waldo. I had a question about is this recipe something that we could possibly do in a rice cooker? I know rice cooker cakes have become pretty popular and was wondering if it was something that could be done in like a steamed cake application.
I think that's a really, really good question. I will say, while I haven't personally tested it in a rice cooker myself, there are some thoughts in my mind immediately. I think that it will cook all the way through in a rice cooker, but the biggest change is that nowadays most modern rice cookers have a nonstick lining, and as a result, you're likely going to see a more dense product. That's not strictly an unenjoyable thing. I think it's just a different end product that we want to keep in mind. But in the vein of making sure that this recipe doesn't require too much specialized equipment, if you don't have a tube pan any aluminum baking pan will do, as long as it's not too wide. So rectangular loaves that are a little bit smaller, or even square tins that aren't too big, will also allow this recipe to bake up very nicely.
Thank you.
Brian, what?
Of course.
Okay, Brian, how was it? Do you want to do something with the rice flour? I mean, have you got the sample, Brian?
I have not gotten the sample yet, and I'm only familiar with the mochiko flour that I see in stores, but excited to try the sample if I do get it. And
Yes, you can get it like after the closing of this workshop. The survey will pop up, and if you answer that survey, you'll get the samples. So stick around, okay, Brian? Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you. I mean, Waldo, I knew you already have so many thoughts and ideas about, but I never thought you would like answer that rice cooker question. But as Brian said, is that popular around there right now?
Mm-hmm. I think that more and more people are looking at rice cookers as multi-function cookers and not strictly limited to cooking rice anymore. So I've seen people make cake, like suggested. I've seen people use rice cookers and their keep warm function as fermentation chambers. So people have made black garlic, which is normally a very long ferment, in rice cookers. Yeah, I mean, I have a rice cooker at home. I love it. And I'm glad that more people are thinking to use it outside its originally intended use.
Right. There's so many questions coming up. Allison went to Mitsuwa. Oh, I missed that place too. They say they saw like mochiko flour. As Brian mentioned, I think mochiko flour is kind of like familiar to the audience there. But what do you think? Like, do you think the combination of Japanese rice flour that you're using today and mochiko flour, I mean, can it be like, collaborating or making something with it? Or what's your idea for that?
Absolutely. I think there are, like this recipe in itself is a combination of starches. There's rice flour, Japanese rice flour. There's cornstarch, coconut flour, and tapioca starch. So the thought of utilizing mochiko, which is glutinous rice flour, with normal rice flour is entirely possible. I will say the two perform differently. And for most recipes, you can't substitute entirely one for the other. Mochiko, in my experience for baked products, lends a really chewy, dense, almost elastic structure to the finished product. Whereas rice flour is much better at delivering results that have a little bit more structure. We're able to produce crackers, crisps. We are able to produce cakes that have a very tender but structured crumb. That's why I think there is a lot of room to explore. I just caution anyone who is shopping for these ingredients not to mistake mochiko, glutinous rice, or also known as glutinous rice flour, with rice flour. Yeah, those two are distinct ingredients, but have a lot of interplay.
Thank you so much. There's Tim. Thank you. Tim is asking you, what other flavors could you customize with today's recipe other than matcha? Maybe you could do something else, with it.
Absolutely. I think that the palette that this lends itself to is extremely broad. Again, best thing about having a recipe like this that hinges on starches that are more neutral in flavor, that lacks any fat in the presence of egg yolk or butter that's normally present in cakes, means that this picks up even the most subtle flavors very, very effectively. So if we're talking citrus, like we wanted to use candied citrus peels as a flavoring ingredient in here. If we want to substitute this tea for another tea, absolutely possible. If you want to lean in a more floral direction, you can absolutely utilize ingredients like rose water or orange blossom water to provide that very, very aromatic back note. And even if you want to lean in the savory direction, I think that more and more people are welcoming of having a savory aspect to even a sweet part of their meal like dessert. Say we wanted to use a small amount of miso and mirin in this as well, almost like the flavor profile in like miso yaki cod. Absolutely possible. This is really a blank canvas that you can adapt a enormous range of flavors to.
You know what, Linda already asked you any savory uses for this rice flour, and you mentioned that already. And about the rose water, savory, go ahead, savory.
Yes, and we didn't get a lot of time to explore savory options in this webinar, but one thing that immediately came to mind for us was fry batters. So traditionally, a problem that's introduced with wheat flours and the gluten present in it when we make fry batters is that the more you mix it or the longer it sits, the tougher and stronger those gluten bonds become. So what that translates to is that overmixed batter or batter that's been sitting around for too long is going to create a fried product where instead of being crispy and biting into it causes the crust to break and release, you kind of have to tug at it more than is ideal. Again, subpar texture. But with rice flour, there's no gluten to worry about. So no matter how much you mix it, no matter how much you let it sit around in your fridge, that batter, theoretically, at least from a protein and gluten formation standpoint, doesn't change at all. So that lends us huge advantages. In a home environment, you don't have to worry about reading instructions and going like, oh, like what's mixed perfectly and what's overmixed. And then in a professional environment, you don't have to worry about doing the proper but very painful thing of anytime you're frying food, you have to make fresh batter. Great, and props to any restaurants that go the extra mile and do that. But admittedly, it's a logistical hurdle, right? So for people to be able to streamline operations by hinging on the fact that rice flour delivers shatteringly crisp results that don't age improperly due to gluten formation, I think there are at-home and at-professional kitchen advantages that rice flour really, really lends itself to, even in the savory world.
Thank you. And Sherry, we'll get to you in a minute. And Amber, you're asking, is there a specific knife that you recommended use when cutting into this cake? I think you've asked that question in the Q&A part too. Waldo, is there any specific knife recommendation?
Yeah, what will make your life easiest is a serrated bread knife of any kind. So that's just a knife that has these little saw-looking edges to it. If you don't have this, no worries. Any long kitchen knife can also cut through this cake very effectively. Something that I forgot to mention, a little bit of a helpful cutting technique. Instead of pressing down to slice through the cake, think that no downward pressure, just sawing back and forth. Even if you're using a regular kitchen knife, this sawing motion is what ensures that you don't destroy any of the volume that you worked so hard to create with this recipe, and that you're able to capture that as a whole slice. So again, bread knife is best. Any chef knife will do. Think to saw back and forth gently, and do not press down, and you'll get best results.
Okay, and we're getting the question from Cherry. Cherry, if you
wish to just come up and talk with us, just please raise your hand, okay? Cherry's asking you, Waldo, what brand matcha are you using this time?
So we actually did a variety of testing. It wasn't a specific brand that I can recommend because we tested a range. We went to a tea shop and picked up some matcha that was produced in Kagoshima, Japan. Fairly high grade. I want to say somewhere in the ballpark of $75 for a pound of that matcha. Great qualities to it, and those carried through in the baking. We also wanted to see if there was a more economic option. So we went down to our local Costco, because Costco is amazing.
Of course, always.
And they sell matcha powder as well. Much more affordable grade. I want to say a 12-ounce bag, so a little less than a pound, 3/4 of a pound, was somewhere in the ballpark of $20. I will say the flavor does express itself differently. This is a little less savory in characteristic than the tea I was using. Still delivers a recognizable tea flavor. Color carries over very nicely. So I'd say that you'd find success in a wide range, and it doesn't hinge on you using like top shelf ingredients. It's just nice to know that if you are using top shelf ingredients to flavor this recipe, it's conducive towards capturing as much of its subtleties and nuances as possible. You don't want to be dumping in extra food costs and not getting a desirable end result.
Right.
I hope that answers the question.
I think it did. And Cherry, I hope you're still there. I think that reached you. Amy, thank you. Just come on up, and if you want to talk with Waldo and us, just please raise your hand, okay? And from Tim, Waldo, before that, is there a recipe posted somewhere? It will be posted on the JFudo homepage, and we'll inform that directly to you, okay? I don't got your name. I haven't got the person's name. And Waldo, any mistakes you came across during experimenting, stuff we should look out for from Tim?
Let's see, mistakes when experimenting. Yes. As I noted, you want to wait until this cake is completely cool before releasing it from the pan. And, being me, I was like, it's cool enough. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? So the first time I rushed it, I didn't give it its full 2 hours. And I thought I had released it from the pan. I inverted it, and half the cake came out. So, learn from my mistakes. The timing recommendations are pretty thoroughly tested. And if in doubt, let it cool a little longer. That way you don't disappoint yourself by baking half a cake. And then aside from that, not really a mistake, more a weird thing I did. I was so enthralled with this ingredient when I first got it. And I opened up this box, there are all these different rice flours in it, that, I opened the bags, I looked at them, I touched them, I was like, wow, so fluffy, nothing's compacted. I don't even need to weigh this. This is gonna be an accurate measurement. It's so free flowing. But took it one step further. I was like, if they're gonna ask me to learn about rice flour and develop uses, I'm gonna taste it. So I took a spoon and I just took a spoonful of rice flour to the mouth. Not many people will probably let you know what plain rice flour tastes like, but that's why I can confidently say neutral flavored, background sweetness.
We've got lots of recipes using Japanese rice flour, and from our staff, this is getting so much reputation, like a great feedback, just because I think you tasted the raw material.
Anything for science.
That's the point. This recipe will be posted in a certain website, JFudo website, but otherwise, we are sending it directly to you. And Tim and Amber, Alice and Linda, I think we covered your questions already, but
Are there any other people who want to talk with Waldo? Because I still have so many questions. Like, you were mixing the batter. How was it? How was the absorption? Is it fast, or is it like, how is the rice flour work in the batter?
I'd say that it's very, very fast to absorb, which works in our favor. Again, that fine line between making sure everything is mixed and making sure that we're not deflating the meringue too much is much wider, because this rice flour is milled so finely and the particle size is so consistent. We were sifting because that's pretty standard practice when making cakes of this nature. But truthfully, I think at home, if someone doesn't even have a sieve, they can probably still get very, very good results, because the rice flour already comes not compacted at all.
Thank you, Waldo. So today we'll be sending the samples to the audience who's done our survey after this workshop. It will be popping out right after this workshop closes, so please wait for it. And if you answer, you'll get the free Japanese rice flour. And Waldo you mentioned about the possibility of the rice flours, and you mentioned the last time we spoke that people in LA, well, not only LA, are always looking for a special ingredients. What would you say? Would you like to still experiment with the Japanese rice flour and like come up with some other recipes in the future?
100%. This was a pleasure for me the entire time. Like I had mentioned, only real goal in life is that one day I can cook well enough to make people happy with food. And getting the chance to work with an ingredient that had such immediately apparent qualities was a blessing for me. And I can't thank you all enough.
Are there any plan of selling that cake at Smorgasburg or any places? I mean, you should, definitely.
Well, I think first things first, before I look to sell this cake anywhere, I need to find a way to ship it to you guys. You guys have been so helpful this entire time for me. The least I could do is make sure I get you a slice of this cake.
Slice will be great. I mean, I would say the whole, but no, I won't be that greedy. But no, something we would like to tell you all, though, is that you gave so much love to this ingredients. And as you said, people here really tried hard to make that quality and trying to reach out to the people over there. And it's a blessing that you just received that message so nicely. Thank you so much.
Of course, and I really want to reciprocate the thanks. For me, again, I'm just the last middleman in a long line of hardworking people who thought, developed, tested, grew, harvested, produced, innovated machinery. I was just the person to put it together in a bowl and throw it in an oven. So I think I play the smallest role in this. I was just lucky to be the recipient of a product that was thoughtfully nurtured the whole way through. And I'm thankful and happy that I was able to carry that forward.
Don't be a stranger. Still be a friend with this Japanese komeko, right?
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was just a pleasure to have Waldo with us today. And please go on with the survey. Please you get the free sample. And I think you would really love to taste and experiment the texture of the komeko that Waldo had today. We are currently going through a trial and error process to reach out to the people, the new audience of this Japanese rice flour. We could really use your feedback, use your wisdom. So survey will be great. And if you have any additional message, please write it on the survey. And we'll give you the sample. And we would love to have your words, kind words. Waldo, thank you so much today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And again, if you want the survey, oh, Amber, thank you. Thank you. It was just a pleasure to having everyone here today. And free samples on your way, so make sure you do the survey. It will come right after this workshop. Allison, thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.